In this segment of the UDL Roadmap module, we shift our attention from engagement to that of representation. Representation refers to the idea that the content is presented in multiple formats, that there are multiple ways in which students are able to access the content. In that way, they're going to maximize their understanding. One size doesn't fit all. How often do we say, I'm a visual learner, or it takes me a bit longer to process? The reality is that each of us learns differently, and there is not a single means of representation that is optimal for all. Here are the classic student learning styles. Typically, in a classroom, we certainly focus on the visual spatial, but we may not necessarily look at a lot of these others. We look at linguistics, and we often look at interpersonal. But a lot of times these other aspects get lost in the shuffle. So it stands to reason, if we don't all learn the same way, if we have a greater diversity in modes of representation, there's a greater likelihood that we will reach or connect with more learners. So if I share information through visual, auditory, print, kinesthetic, graphical modes of representation, I'm more likely to connect with more students. More students will perceive and comprehend what I'm trying to have them learn. We often go into lessons and our first thought is, okay, how do we activate prior knowledge? That's a sound practice, but we are assuming the prior knowledge has been assimilated. Often that's not the case, because that prior knowledge has not necessarily been offered to the students in a variety of modes. To address the inequity in experiences or background, we can offer common launch points. I'm going to give you a personal story as a side, and I think that I assumed all kids grew up in similar types of environments as I did. That families would travel and take their children to museums, to national parks, and listen to presentations from the park rangers, that they would have exposure to musical experiences and experiences of looking at different cultures. A Korean dance troupe coming in to perform, seeing Blue Man Group perform. It's just a whole host of experiences. I was blown away when I put up a Gary Larson cartoon in my classroom that referenced park rangers, only to have students look at me with these very blank expressions. I think that was when it first dawned on me that no, these students don't all necessarily have rich, culturally diverse, experientially diverse, geographically diverse experiences growing up. So what we need to do is to provide even those students who have a very rich family culture and those students that have a very challenging family culture or limited experiences outside of a school building, those students all need to be given a common launch point. So the idea of creating an experience that then they all share even though they're going to bring different pieces to it, by giving them a common launch point, that certainly is going to activate different types of learning, and it's also going to give every student a place where they can actively use their voice to share those ideas. In the last series of slides, we looked at 8 different student learning styles. This is very similar. They've lumped a couple of them together to look at 7 different learning styles, but I think the explanations are a little bit more complete and maybe a bit more helpful. For example, in the last series of slides, we looked at visual spatial types of learners. So that's been identified here as the visual learner. They do well when they use symbols, boxes, charts, colors in their notes. These students also do well if you're drawing cartoons on the board as you're explaining something. They've got some visual connection to what's being discussed. In the verbal category, we're looking at not only the linguistic piece of things, but also tying in a bit of the interpersonal. So people that learn best or learn as part of their learning style really value the verbal learning, have a high passion for words. And so if they are reciting things out loud, reading their own notes, highlighting key points, that visual learning, or I'm sorry, that verbal learning is a true asset to their process of learning. In the aural, A-U-R-A-L, we're using sound and music. So in the last models, we had musical learning style. So students who value or learn best when they are using aural modes develop understanding and memory by hearing and listening. So it's easier for them to understand spoken instructions rather than reading it. Physical was identified in the last slide as bodily kinesthetic. So in this sense, we use our bodies and sense of touch to learn. Physical learners learn by touching, moving, building. It's a hands-on type approach. The logical learner asks a lot of questions. They want to understand the whole picture. In the last slide, the logical person, or the logical learner rather, was naturalistic and logical mathematical. So they're recognizing, they're noticing details, they're thinking abstractly, they see relationships and patterns. So those two categories, the naturalistic and the logical mathematical, in this slide get lumped together as logical. Social learners prefer to learn with others. They learn better in groups. They contribute to the generating of ideas and brainstorming with others, and that launches a much deeper array of thinking than they would have on their own. So these are the interpersonal learners. And finally, the solitary learner, this is something that we can't ignore. There are learners in our classrooms that are very introspective, very independent, and they need to have some time on their own, thinking alone, keeping a journal, thinking metacognitively about understanding. So an individual student is not just a single type of learner. They're a combination of these. And the question is, are we providing in the classroom enough variety so that we can tap into all these aspects and so that we can reach students that are stronger logical learners than necessarily oral learners. It doesn't mean that they can't learn in each mode, but we need to represent the information that's being provided to students in a variety of ways. In short, if we want to maximize student learning, we need to blend different learning styles together. Focusing just on one learning style, focusing just on standing up and delivering a lecture, focusing on having students sit and fill out worksheets is not going to maximize student learning. We've got to blend different learning styles together. The 20th century factory model of education no longer works. The idea of the 20th century factory model was to create a workforce post-World War II that could meet the growing demands of an industrialized society. We're no longer there. And perhaps it never worked for all students and all learning styles. That was never the goal. To wrap up this segment of the asynchronous learning module for Universal Design for Learning, we'd like to share this video with you about breaking traditional molds. Yes, I recognize that the spelling is M-O-U-L-D-S because this comes from Down Under. So it's using the British spelling. So if you would just direct your attention to Sam Sherratt.
Thank you. Morning. Oh, I haven't got a clicker. What's all that hooting? In 1983, when I was 9 years old, I went to school in Tanzania, the International School of Tanganyika. Some of you may have worked there. In the 33 years since then, I have attended and worked at and visited countless other schools. And I've got to say, I'm worried. I'm not sure things are really changing. I'm also not sure things are changing in the outside world. If we look outside the bubble of our schools, which we have to, it's not pleasant viewing. We're still not very nice to each other. We still spend more money on killing than anything else. We're caught in a vortex of consumerism, of waste. We allow the people that made Agent Orange to grow our food for us. At the moment, also, we seem to be stuck in a period of self-obsession. Most worryingly for me, though, are the millions of people all over the world who hate their jobs, who go to work and count the hours until the end of the day, who count the days until the end of the week. They're wishing their lives away. And we put them there. Since the idea of school first came along, I think we've lost our way. We've become very passive. We allow outside forces to tell us what school should be like. We allow outside forces to tell us what successful looks like. all that pressure has created molds. Schools are molds. You go from one school to another, they all look pretty much the same. They all smell the same and feel the same. Inside school, there's more molds. This is a mold. It's a classroom. We put kids in them every day and take them out. This is the mold for what we do to time in schools. The giant ice cube tray of learning with a little bit of fun at the end of the week, Sean. And our subjects can become molds too. I'm doing maths now. Next, I'm going to do science. What we think is collaboration has become a mold that looks like this. Inevitably, of course, we're molds too. We're in the teacher mold. If we have some ambition, well, there's a nice little job description mold waiting for us to be squeezed into next. And it doesn't always pan out very well. Ultimately, of course, we're trying to squeeze students through a small number of doorways. And sadly, that means we're pushing out 18-year-old molds. We're pushing out people who are going to have to wait, in many cases, to find where their talents lie, to find what their passions truly are, to find out what exactly it is they want to offer to the world. Part of the problem here is this constant pursuit of improvement, this getting better and better and better and better and better. It's all retch and no vomit, as Alan Watts says. It's got a kind of debilitating energy to it. But if we start to think about being just different instead of better, it's got a whole new energy to it. To do that, though, we're going to have to break out, we have to break free of all of these molds. We're going to have to redefine the school experience. We're going to have to redefine what school means to students and to us. Now, there's lots of people here at Learning too with plenty of ideas about how to do just that. Learn from them over the next 2 days. But there's also people all over the world in small pockets who are doing it. We are more connected than ever. This is our time. If we can join the dots, then we can learn from each other, we can gain confidence from each other, we can gain strength from each other. And maybe then schools can reclaim their power, the power to shape lives, the power to create cultures, and to define societies instead of the other way around. So metaphors are powerful. And the metaphor I'd like you to leave with is that of the mold. Please go back to where you work and look for all the ideas, the systems, and the people that have become molds that are holding us all back, and break them. Thank you.
Education post-pandemic cannot go back to what it was. We do need to break molds. We can do better. We must do better.